Hi, family. In this episode, we do talk about depression. We talk about thoughts of loneliness. Loneliness is a major topic in this episode, just as a heads up. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Hi, family. Welcome back to episode 107. I am so excited to have this episode today. My friend, my sister in the empowerment movement is our guest today, Yasmin Marrero. And I know that you guys are going to be completely blessed by what she offers us today. I want to just take a moment and just say how grateful I am for this journey, for this process, for all of you that have received me, for all of you that understand the mission. You guys have made this process so fulfilling and humbling. You took what was potentially the scariest thing I was to do, because Curvy Confidence is 3 years old. But I stopped and I didn't know what people would say or what people would think. And so you guys helped make the scariest thing I could do one of the most rewarding. I jumped and God caught me, and He caught me by using your arms. And so I thank you so much for the village that has been created. Y'all know how we started off. We got to start it off with prayer. God has been so good. And no matter what your religious background or persuasion is, you're welcome in this space. I do recognize Jesus Christ as Lord, and so that is who I pray to. But please know that you are welcome here. This is your safe space, just like it's my safe space. We're family. And if we believe something different, that's okay. We still family. Father God, I just thank you for this day, for this moment. God, we're at episode 107, and I'm so grateful for what you're doing. I thank you for the increase that is happening. I thank you for the things that you're doing, not only in my life, but in the village of Curvy Confidence's lives. I thank you, God, that transformation is happening. I thank you that we're being broken free from depression and anxiety. I thank you that we're stepping into our true and fullest selves. God, I pray that today this podcast and this vlog blesses somebody. And no matter where they are or what they're going through, that they are blessed as a result of this podcast and as a result of the message that Yasmin stands for and that she spreads and the light that she is. I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for Jesus. This be praying in your son Jesus' name. Amen. All right, y'all. You know it's time for the sex tip of the week. I feel like I sing on here a lot and I can't sing, so I feel really bad for whoever's listening to it. I'm sorry. But this sex tip of the week is something that is not necessarily weird, but something that may be uncomfortable. So hear me out. I know sometimes when we're expecting to hear sex tips, it's like, girl, get some whips, get a vibrator, and I'm like, okay, but what about the intimacy, right? What creates intimacy with our partners or even with ourselves, whatever stage you're in right now, okay? So this is what I suggest. We all have insecurities. We all have those things that if our partner touches them, it's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And we have to do some work surrounding us getting to a comfortable place in our bodies with that, right? But today we're going to talk about how to get you and your partner, how to feel safe with your partner when he or she or them may touch a part of your body that is sensitive, right? Or that makes you feel like you just want to crawl into a shell, right? And for me, it's my belly. I've said that throughout the course of the season, my belly and my arms. Oh my God, if during sex they could just disappear and go away, I would be a happy, happy, happy camper, right? But they can't. the belly's a big part of the body. Arms, they have their job. So we got to figure out what to do. And so one thing that I suggest you to do is, first of all, have a very vulnerable, transparent, and open conversation with your partner. So it's going to start there. But then one night, naked. So this is a very vulnerable experience, right? So you may be triggered, you will cry. It will be a bonding experience for you and your partner, right? So you stand before your partner completely naked. And I don't mean just physically, I mean emotionally. So it is tough, right? And you and your partner, you have a conversation and you say, partner, this is the part of me that I would love to share with you. And then your partner would then go and begin to kiss very slowly and softly the place on your body that gives you the most pause, that when they touch it during sex, it's like, oh my God, I wish you wouldn't have done that. I'm not really in the mood anymore. They begin to kiss it, right? And your partner begins to develop a relationship with that part of your body, and you begin to find comfort because you see that your partner isn't disgusted, your partner isn't grossed out, your partner loves it, and your partner has a bond with it. And what then happens is that sex becomes a much more intimate experience for you because you don't have that voice in the back of your mind that's like, oh my God, he or she touched my belly. No, that's gone. It's gone because there has now been a bonding experience around the two of you sharing this insecurity with one another. And then you go and you reciprocate that with your partner. And when I tell you the sex becomes much more intimate, it becomes an experience. And many of my partners can tell you, I like experiences. So it becomes an experience and it's not just an act, right? It becomes an act of love. It's the gem of the day or the gem of the week. I always say the gem of the day because I release this on a day, but I release one episode a week. So it's really like the gem of the week. And this, guys, I love animals, and I have been trying to find a gem of the week that does not have anything to do with animals, but I just love them. And I think that animals, when we look at what they do naturally, they just teach us something that is so juicy and something that is so delicious. And today I want to talk about crabs. And I know that's weird. I know it's weird, but just rock with your sister for a minute. Crabs go through this process called molting, molting. Crabs do not grow in a linear way like other humans or like other creatures may. So like humans, we grow linearly or whatever. We grow in lines, right? Bears, lions, right? There's a way that they grow. Well, crabs don't do that because they have a hard shell that restricts them from doing that. So for a crab to be able to grow, it must shed the shell that is keeping them at that size and then recreate another shell that fits into who they currently are. I'm gonna just let that marinate with you for a minute. In order for a crab to be able to reach its fullest potential, it must go through a shedding process. The crab must take off the former shell and get a new shell that fits who they currently are. How often do we wear things that don't fit us? And I don't mean clothes. How often do we wear identities that do not fit us? What do I mean by that? Well, I'm a failure. Well, I'm a glutton. Well, I'm never gonna succeed. Well, I'm broke. Well, I can't dress. I'm not pretty. I'm not beautiful. I'm too fat. I'm too skinny. I'm too black. I'm too white. My hair's too nappy. My hair's too straight. How many times do we adopt these truths that don't fit us? How many times do we have people around us that just don't fit us? But we keep them around, and as a result, we stay small. I want to challenge you and I'm gonna do this too because I haven't done this. It just hit me. So let me be very transparent. I want both of us this week to write a list of things that we need to shed. I believe that it is time for us to get an appropriate sized shell. It is time for us to get to live a life that is appropriate to the size that is within us. No more living below, no more being less than who we are. No, it is time for us to rise up and live to our fullest potential. So what I'm going to do, and what I'm going to ask you to do with me, is to write a list of things it's time to shed those things. It's time to let those things go. They don't have a place. They got to go. Tell me where to go. That might not even be the words. All right, y'all, it is time for the interview. I'm so excited. I feel so blessed. Our guests have been amazing and transparent and open and gorgeous. And Yasmin is gorgeous. Wait till you see her skin. It's sickening. She's so pretty. It's sick. I hate her. But Yasmin is an entrepreneur. She's a genius. Literally studied neuroscience and now is in school in Chicago. And she has developed her own empowerment platform called Women's Empowerment Circle, where she consistently releases content to help you go into the next level of your journey. She is a sister, she's a daughter, she's a friend. And when you meet her, her light is so large and so warming that you can tell she never has met a stranger. So here's the interview. Let me know what you think. Hi, Yasmin. How are you today?
I'm good.
Good.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you as a guest on our episode. I did let the people know a little bit about who you are, but please let them know who you are, Miss Lightbeam.
So my name is Yasmin Marrero. I'm a leadership and empowerment coach, originally from the South Bronx, New York. I'm currently doing empowerment workshops for women. I'm also doing empowerment coaching, and that's me.
That's you. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about loneliness and also living a very disciplined life. One thing I really have enjoyed watching you from afar and also watching what you're doing with your brand is that you seem to live a very disciplined life, but you also talk about topics that hit us right in the gut. So, can you talk about what your journey with loneliness has been like? Have you ever dealt with it? When you do deal with it, how do you overcome? What has your journey been like?
So, in particular, with loneliness, I feel like there are different types of loneliness I felt when I was thinking about loneliness a lot. I felt loneliness being around people. So when I was growing up, I felt as though with my family, even though they were there and they were present, I necessarily did not feel connected to them. So that was a level of loneliness. When I was in school, in undergrad, working through all the things I did, being one of the only Latinas that I saw on the campus, that was a level of loneliness. I felt a level of loneliness with my career trajectory. So I started out wanting to be a doctor, doing neuroscience research for 6 years, and no one really understanding even what that meant. And now shifting all the way to coaching, that was a level of loneliness, and loneliness on being a place where I did not feel I should have been. So I was living in a place where I felt physically alone, because I didn't feel like anyone understood that I just didn't feel physically like I should have been there. And so there are different levels of loneliness I've felt from being around people to being single to being in a place I didn't feel. And I feel like now I have grown to know loneliness as a thing. It's a calling to come back home. And what that means to me
That's
is to
good. You saw. For those that are listening on the podcast, when she said it, I made a face and she sort of paused. I was like, oh, that was so yummy.
Yeah, so it's a calling to come back home, to come back to yourself. And I think that is where this practice of discipline has come in. This practice of doing what I need to refill my cup and to make me feel like I am whole in myself, in what I'm doing, and moving forward with that. I feel like loneliness has always been that calling, and it's only now that I have started to understand it and to dive deeper into it that that I've started to overcome it in a sense.
What does you just said? It's only when that's when you begin to dive more into it. What does that mean? Like, what does it mean to dive into loneliness?
Yes. So one thing that I have learned to do is to journal a lot. And I ask whenever I feel lonely, because I am aware of the fact that it's only temporary, the fact that it is what I call coming back home or calling to come back home. I will sit down with my journal or I'll do an audio memo, and I will talk to myself and ask myself questions like what is going on? How are you feeling? As if I am my like a best friend. And then asking these questions of where is this loneliness coming from, and asking why 5 times after that to really get to the root of what that loneliness is calling and what that loneliness what's underlying it. And in doing that and asking why 5 times and sitting with myself and journaling for 30 minutes or whatever the case is, I am able to get to the nitty gritty, because I'll start answering, it can be like, why am I feeling lonely? Well, because I don't feel like I have a community. Why don't you have a community? Well, because you just moved to a new place. Well, what can we do then to start building that community, and how can we start adapting what it is this feeling is? So that's what I mean by diving deeper, to really just sit with myself and do something where I'm talking to myself as if I'm talking to a friend.
Wow. Are you familiar with parts therapy?
No.
Yes, I'm currently going through it now, where it talks about, some of us have an abandoned part, some of us have an
Mm,
angry part, so that when these emotions come to visit you, you recognize that that is not self, right? That is
mhm,
an extension of self that has flared up, and you don't have to make a decision while you are angry or while so and about developing a relationship with those parts, right? So
mhm,
one of my dominant parts is I have an anger part, right?
mhm, mhm,
And I named her. Her name is Denise. So when Denise flares up, I can talk to her and say, Denise, what's going on?
mhm.
Why are you here? First of all, thank you for coming because you've always protected me. So thank
Yes.
you, but what is going on? And so when you were talking about when you're feeling that way, asking yourself why 5 times to get to the root of why I feel that way, it reminds me a lot of parts therapy and communicating with the inner child that's in there, right? To
Mhm,
get to what is actually going on. You said a word that I absolutely love that I don't feel like we talk about enough in healing spaces, and that is the root. Can you
mhm.
talk a little bit about why is it so important to get to the root of a thing?
Yes. So I would say, so first of all, when I say the root of a thing, whatever, when you see something in the distance and you acknowledge it in the distance, it could be a friend that's walking towards you. You only see what you're perceiving at that moment. And it's only when they start to get closer to you that you can start to see what they're wearing, how they look, what their hairstyle is more closely. When I talk about the root, it's really deciding to get closer to what that thing is and identify it as it is as a whole. Kind of talking back to your parts therapy, your anger self. I really did love that, because it's what we think something is typically what it's not. And when
Oh,
we
girl.
don't
Okay, wait. Say it one more time, too. One more time. Yes.
what we think something is typically what it's not, which is to say that when we are having these emotional reactions, when we are perceiving a certain thing, typically there are stories that underlie that. And those stories we can't tap into until we allow ourselves to explore that space. So an example that I use a lot is that one of my stories was that I wasn't going to have a child. I still don't know if I'll ever have a child, but I had closed off that possibility of having a child. And I grew up in a very strong woman centered world. So it was my single mother, my single grandmother, it was my single aunt, and they were all single mothers. And I had decided that unconsciously almost, because a lot of this comes up in a way, a lot of this can go under the radar and we don't pay much attention to it. But as I got into relationships, as I started dating, I just felt as though if I ever was going to have a child, I wasn't going to be in a relationship because all I had ever seen was a single motherhood. And so that, became my story. It became my narrative, became what I saw and what I saw for myself because of what I saw in the people that were closest to me. And so that is a root that I was only able to uncover when I asked myself, or when my love, he asked me, why don't you want to have kids, essentially. And I had to ask myself and sit down with myself, like, what is the real root of why I don't want to have kids, and is that something that I want to hold true for myself moving forward? I mean, the even the concept of marriage was one of those things where I was like, I'm never gonna get married, because I never saw anyone be happy and married, or get married with someone that fulfilled and pushed them forward. And so that was a narrative. So getting to the root and talking about the root is that it's only when we start to dive deeper and decide to enter that space of vulnerability, of questioning, of discomfort, do we realize what our stories are and if those are things we want to move forward with.
Mm. You know, you're blessing me because you just uncovered a root for me. Because as you were talking, I was like, I say that. Like that.
Mm.
I say I'm not. And then there was a point in my life where I convinced myself that I couldn't have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would I was like, well, I'm of a certain weight, and so menstrual cycles are like, that's a lot of information, but they're not regular. You're not, you can't
Mm-hmm.
have them, right? But when you said, it's like, wow, Brittany, you don't want your kid to deal with what you've had to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
and so you're taking that on. And then when you hit the marriage thing, there, up until very recently, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, marriage, who needs it? I would just be
Exactly.
sinning and sexing. I don't like, like, nobody wants to go through all that and then have to get a divorce at the end, right? And so it is about identifying that we are adopting the stories of what we learned. There was something that you said at the very beginning of the interview that I have been trying to shake out of my head, and I just cannot.
Okay.
And you talked about being lonely, even though you had a very supportive family.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because in episode 103, I talk about, I had a family, they did the best they could. My mother was on drugs, but my village really tried to step in, but I still felt like I was in the shadow. I've always
Mm-hmm.
felt like I lived in the shadow. So can you talk about what that experience like was for you growing up?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a first generation everything almost. My mother came from DR when she was 19. She had me at 22. My father, he was already in the States, but he didn't graduate middle school, and so their mindsets about what it was to live life was a lot around survival. And my grandmother had this concept, everyone almost in my family had this concept of survival. And for me, coming into this, they were trying to show me how to level up that survival mechanism, which is to say, they wanted me to be a doctor. because they thought I was going to make a lot of money, so the struggle wouldn't be as hard. And being of that mindset and them having that concept for me, it was as if, I was almost alone because they didn't know how to tell me to do it. They didn't know, they couldn't relate to my story. They couldn't relate to growing up in the South Bronx, being one of the only English speakers in the family, pursuing sciences, going to med school, all of these things that were new to me. They couldn't relate to it. And because they were in survival mode, working all the time, when they weren't working, they were exhausted and they were at home, the level of compassion that I felt as though they could have given me at that time, and that level of openness that I could have gave them about how I was feeling, it just misaligned. It just wasn't there. And so and so me, also having two separate households, right? Like, I grew up mainly with my mother, um but having seen my father and being around my father as well as I was growing up, so there was a lot of things that were happening, a lot of elements as a child that, it wasn't just me, it was also my little brother. And so, like, the heartaches and the things that I would go through, I would almost try and make it easier for my brother to go through, or try to avoid my brother making that. So there was just a lot of pressure as a child that I didn't feel like I could speak to anyone about. And even if I did speak to them about it, I never felt as though they would understand it, because I was, doing so many new things and being so different from the ways that everyone else grew up. And my story had already started being different just by virtue of being born in America. Um, and so that all kind of caused a level of loneliness, which I would never place blame on either parties. It wasn't because of myself, or it wasn't because of my family. They were doing what they knew. And so I have to see the innocence in them as well as the innocence of myself, because I didn't know I could open up to them, about this loneliness, about feeling like there was all this pressure on me to perform and to be, um, all that I could be in school, and all of these things.
Wow, that is so powerful that you say that. Because since I'm in grad school right now with your honey
Mm-hmm.
bun, and since being here, I cried for the first time over my mother's addiction because I didn't feel like I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I was harboring all of these judgments on her, because I didn't see that she was on a journey of her own, right? Just like I'm on a journey, she's on a journey too. So, as a young woman who grew up in the South Bronx, was born into a family that was about survival and making it to the next level. Before I go there, I want to talk about how did you come back to what your dream was, right?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I essentially didn't. That was another story of mine. I never saw work as something you would ever enjoy. And so I was on track to go to be a doctor, then to do neuroscience research, and study the brain. And I studied the brain for 6 years. And I liked elements everywhere I was. I liked little pieces of it. But none of it made me feel fulfilled and excited and passionate, and just like I was doing what I was meant to do. And I made peace with that because of the fact that no one in my family ever loved doing work. Work was what you needed to do to make the money to make your family comfortable and to help your kids grow up in a good neighborhood and all of these things. And so at one point, I was in graduate school actually at Emory, and I finished my first year.
Emory is one of the top schools, just for everybody that's listening.
So I was doing my doctorate, and I decided, I was on the phone with my love, and he was like, "You're not happy," just like that. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was just like, "There has not been a day that you have said something positive about your life." Meanwhile, I loved Atlanta. I was loved every element of living in Atlanta. But it just took me back. It was just like, whoa, like that was just such a moment of like, I need to stop. I need to become aware. And he is very much into understanding what his spirit is talking about, and listening to his spirit and allowing that to guide him and nurturing his spirit. And you know, I didn't have that yet. I didn't have that practice. I didn't have those elements that made me even listen to my spirit. And so when he said that, I decided I would start listening myself, and I started praying and using meditation beads to ask if it was not God, because I didn't necessarily have a full concept of God as I do now, but asking myself within, like, may I please find my passion, may I please find my purpose, and I would be on my knees crying about it. Um, and it got to the point where I started seeing myself having images in my mind of the things that I liked, and asking myself, do you like to be in that space? Would you enjoy, trying this thing out? And so I ended up taking a gap year from the program and not going back, because I went back to New York, back home, where I worked at a nonprofit doing work for outreach programs. And I started seeing myself in the spaces of doing workshops, seeing myself in the spaces of uplifting people, of showing people that they are all always a leader. They just have to see it. And really, that's what sparked it. That's where I was able to sit down and be like, hey, what is my dream? And then also, on top of that, being okay with possibly letting my family down, because they didn't understand my dream, nor did they understand this pursuit of doing something fulfilling, instead of doing something that got you a 3-story house.
That is so good. I feel like you're like talking about my life, because my family thought I was going to be the doctor too, because I was the smart one, And then here I come in at, what was I, like 12, saying, "Hey, I'm going to be an actor," and everybody was like, "Oh no, you're not." You're gonna, yeah. Up until when it was time to, apply for colleges, my mom was still saying, "Can you apply?" Because I'm from Rochester, New York, and we have University of Rochester, which is a big medical school, and she was working for them, and so she was like, you could go here for free, and da 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 da. And it was actually my daddy, with all my daddy issues, who told me to tell her, he ain't crazy, told me to tell her that if she wanted a doctor in the family, to go back to school. So you know how that went.
Okay, Dad.
Right, but here I am, an actor. So you talked a little bit about the beginning of establishing a spiritual base, or getting in touch with spirit. What was that process like for you, and how have you continued to implement a spiritual practice in your life?
That's a good question. So the first, I think it started with books for me. And one of the books that I always credit everything to, the start of it too, was How to Be a Badass by Jen Sincero.
Yes.
It's amazing. And when I listened to it, this was around the time where, I feel like it still is, meditate. Everyone's like, you should meditate. Everything's going to come true if you just meditate. Everything's going to happen to you. You're going to be the best. And I'm just like, I'm sitting here, quiet, with my eyes closed, and nothing's coming up. But I read that book, and her talk about gratitude, her talk about doing these little tasks throughout your day, and really starting to build a vision and seeing yourself where you want to be. That's when I was like, this isn't something that you can do one off, right? This is something you have to continuously do. Just like you would go in for a 9 to 5 to make money to pay rent every single day of the week, and you're dedicating your time to that, or dedicating your time to your side hustle, or whatever the case is, you need to dedicate time for self. And the only real way to dedicate time for self is to set out these time blocks consistently, because it's only when it's consistent do you start seeing the effects. That's why people say all the time, that meditation thing, you have to do it for more than just a couple of days. Like, you can't just, and it's hard. It's very hard. But for me, it started with that book, and then it started as, so I have mala beads. They're very similar to this. I give these bracelets to my women, and these are garnet stones. I will get you one. I made these because essentially what you use, they're used like prayer beads, and you go bead by bead reciting something that you want to pray for, or you just breathe and you're sitting there with that intention. And I have the necklaces, each of the necklaces has had a different intention. And when those necklaces break, it's as if your intention has been set free. And so I bought one just to try, because I was like, I can't sit here and meditate and do nothing, because my mind starts to wander. I feel no effect by it. But when I started praying with those beads and asking for a purpose and to find my passion, I started to see the effects of believing that I could find my passion, and believing in myself to take those leaps of faith, and just letting it all go and surrendering in that way. And because that worked for me, and because it got me to the point of like landing a job in New York right once I decided to leave school, getting a job where my supervisor was willing to allow me to tamper in places, or tamper in things that weren't my sole responsibilities under my title, and encouraging me to try new things and new trainings and just all the things, and being very blessed in that regard, that I was like, it's only when I'm disciplined do I feel whole. And so now,
Whoa, wait. Before you go, say that one more time.
I said it's only when I'm disciplined do I feel whole. And so whether it's through the mala beads and the praying, or through, now I have a routine of writing morning pages, which is I write 3 pages every single morning, no matter what. Whatever, reading at least every other day, something that is going to fill my spirit or fill my faith. These little practices help me feel as though I am aware of myself. I'm aware of what my intuition is telling me and how I'm moving about in this world. And it allows me to show up more as myself. Like, one of the things we talked about before was this talking about self-doubt, and like thinking, just having that inner voice that tells you can't do this, or whatever the case is, that comes from our lineage or what our families have kind of taught us. And having these practices help me say thank you for being here, self-doubt, but also you're not the truth, and acknowledging that you're not the truth, and moving forward from that.
Girl. Girl, okay. So for those that of us, because I have to put myself. So I'm someone where I technically have a morning routine. But my morning routine depends on how busy my life is at that moment. So sometimes I will wake up at 6, but most of the time I'm gonna wake up at 9:30 for a 10:30 class. How can we begin to discipline ourselves to stick to the routine, so that it becomes a no matter what situation, like you talked about with the morning pages?
Yes. The first thing I'll say is it is totally fine to get off track, because when we get off track, it allows you to start saying, okay, this routine doesn't fit in with what I'm doing right now. What else can I do that will help me? So, for example, with the mala beads and with the praying, that would take me about 10 to 20 minutes every morning before class when I was in my doctorate program. And that worked out for me, because if I didn't do it in the morning, I would find time to do it in the afternoon, or I would find time to do it in the evening. And because I decided I'm going to do this no matter what, or I'm going to do this every other day, no matter what, I was able to find that routine. Now, some days that wasn't possible, and some days that was more challenging. And I would always have a backup, which was writing or reading. And you would give yourself a timer. You have to essentially find out what practices help still fill up your cup in order for you never to fall into that level of, like we talked about before, loneliness and feeling like you weren't home, because life will go and work in very mysterious ways and very challenging ways. But even 5 minutes might make that difference for you if you do it every day. So if you can't write, for example, in the morning, like morning pages take me about 45 minutes. It's a little crazy. But but if like for my bracelet, right? That will take me 5 minutes, and deciding to do that, or taking a moment, as you do with your deep breaths in the podcast, like those deep breaths, deciding, okay, I'm gonna do this 3 times a day and recite an affirmation that I feel whole in myself. Finding those practices that fit with your schedule will make all the difference, and you have to decide to just try new things, because there's so many practices out there. There are people who meditate for an hour. There are people who work out and meditate, like yoga is technically a workout and a meditation at the same time, although some teachers teach it differently. And just trying to writing, a lot of people prefer writing because they're able to let go and then come back to it. Reading, as I mentioned, all of these different practices, trying them for at least a week, a couple days, giving yourself a time limit or a page limit, and then seeing how they work and deciding if that's not the time for that practice to keep you whole, deciding on a different one.
Wow. So what I hear you saying is start small
Mm-hmm.
and then work your way up to the
Yeah.
big shebang. For me, that is genius, because I'm one of those people that be like, okay, Brittany, you're meditating today, an hour, let's go, and then it just be like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this.
Yes.
Same with the gym. It's like I'm working out 5 times this week. I go once.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
like it's not gonna work out. What would you tell baby Yasmin if you could go back and have a conversation with her? What would you tell her?
Well, before you say that, I want to tell you that I totally feel you on the gym thing, and I totally feel you on the meditation thing. And the thing that will push you forward is if you don't, instead of saying, "Oh, I only went one time," start expressing gratitude for going that one time, for yourself, for your body, for your whole spirit, and you will start to see a shift. It's almost as if like you gave yourself a piece of chocolate after it, and you start to get like, "Oh yeah, I did it,"
And so it all boils down to self-compassion. Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna go to the gym tomorrow and I'm gonna tell them to do that. And it's so funny. I feel like universe is really speaking to me, because my friend, I was texting her and I said, this was yesterday. I said, I don't think I can do this. And she said, what if now the messaging becomes, I am capable of doing this? What happens then? And there was this immediate shift. And with the situation, I'm like, okay, I can get through this. Like, I'm capable of doing it. It may take some time, but I'm capable. So that was genius. What would you tell baby Yasmin?
So, I would tell baby Yasmin so many things, but mainly I would tell her that it's okay to do what you feel your heart is calling you to do. That it's okay to feel different. It's okay to feel as though you're on a different track from everyone else. It's okay. It will take time, but you will come more into yourself. You will bloom so much quicker and flourish so much faster, and just never let yourself go, if you just trust that you have all that you need inside of you.
Oh, trust that you have what you need inside of you. Wow. Wow. If I could tell baby Brittany that, do you know how many heartbreaks?
Girl, who you telling?
You don't need him, girl. Thank you so much. Right. This has been amazing. Please tell the people where to find you.
Yes. You can find me. The easiest way is on my website, which is iamyasminmarrero.com. But on Facebook and on Instagram, I have my Women's Empowerment Circle social media, which is Brittany's doing a dance. For y'all that listen to the podcast, it's at W Empowerment C as in circle. And I am so happy and grateful that you took the time out to interview me and have me on the podcast. This has been amazing, and I'm so excited for everything that you do, Brittany. It's amazing. So many people have been touched by it, and even I've been inspired by this.
Oh, thank you, my sister, and likewise, guys. Literally, Yasmin posts things, and it'd be like, "This is my life." Okay, and then the thing I love about the content that you post is not just, and I'm working on this in the content I post. It's a struggle. Is you don't just say, "Okay, I'm dealing with this issue," but you say, "This is how you get through it," right? And so you give people practical tools. So please hit her up. I'm gonna tag your Instagram in this video, and also have the information available. Thank you so much.
This has been a
thank
joy.
you. Thank you. All right, don't hang up. This part is this part. This part isn't gonna be in it. But on a serious note, I really don't know how you want to be billed, because I don't know if you want Yasmin Willis or
Steven's out there. He probably like, look at Brittany. You can put me just as you can either be just Yasmin or Yasmin Marrero.
Okay, I got you. Thank you so much.
Of course, and I will send you the @ and the website name. I'll just send that to you in a text, so you don't have to go looking for it or anything of that sort.
Thank you. This was so delicious. Like, I'm about to go back and watch it for myself, because I have to take notes. Like, wait a minute. This was so great. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you. And you have a great week.
You too, darling.
I love Yasmin for her transparency. That interview, when I was listening to it, I was like, wow. It was one of those moments where it was like, no matter where you're from, no matter what your ethnicity or nationality is, we're all more alike than we are different. And in episode 103, I talked about how I always felt like I was living in the shadows. Like, I always felt like I was living life for somebody else. And when Yasmin talked about, feeling like she was living her life so that her family could live a certain way, that really touched me, because even now I stood there. I'm like, okay, all right, the early part of my 20s, I was, wasn't financially there for me all the way, because I made really irresponsible choices, but now I gotta get it because my mama gotta retire, and all of that pressure that we put on ourselves when that pressure isn't ours to have. I also really enjoyed her talking about having self-compassion for yourself within your daily routine. Because I will be honest with you, like, when I start setting up my daily routines, I get really strict. I'm like, okay, Brittany, we're gonna live a disciplined life, and there's no room for self-compassion. There's no room for error. And as a result, I fell at it, because there is no room for error. I'm not loving myself through that process. So I really took that away from our conversation, that yeah, I can have a plan, I can have a daily routine, but if something happens, I can love myself through that, and I can go with the flow, and it's not the end of the world. Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it like Kari. Okay. Did I just do it? Okay. You know how we end this out. We end this out with a weekly affirmation and 3 deep breaths to send each other off in love. This week, my affirmation is, I'm no longer living in the shadows. I'm no longer living in the shadows. I have another one. I am open to all that life brings. Oh my God, guys. As soon as I said that, I felt my body just relaxed. My hips, I hold tension in my hips. And I feel lighter. My body just relaxed. I'm open to all that life brings. I'll send you off with 3 deep breaths. Thank you, family. This was amazing. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I'll see you next week. Oh, I'll see you next week. Oh, I'll see you next week. Oh, bye, family.